I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Audinate and one of the founders of the company. And so what I want to do today is give you a bit of a glimpse into what's happening now with the standards world, new products, and also perhaps where we're going or looking to go in the future. So my talk today is going to break into 3 parts. So I want to spend a little bit of time, 3-4 slides, talking about what's happening in the standards world at the moment, particularly with a new standard called AES67. Also talk a little bit about AVB and what we're doing with AES67 in Dante. Then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Dante Via, which is a new software product that we have here at the show. And if you want to have a look at Dante Via, you're certainly welcome to visit our booth or check out a demo in the other room. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to Dante Via and what you can do with it. And then the last thing I want to talk about is where we're going with Dante in terms of services that will scale Dante systems in the coming years. So I'm going to start with the sort of standards world. I give a lot of presentations on standards, and this one you'll probably be thankful it's fairly short. But the new thing that's kind of really happening in the standards world at the moment is a standard called AES67. And you've probably come across this or maybe heard about this around the show, particularly if you're interested in the broadcast world, where there's certainly interest in this standard. So what I've tried to do is capture on one slide at a really high level what AES67 actually is. So it's a standard, it's a document that comes out of the Audio Engineering Society, which is not really known for its networking protocols generally. So what the Audio Engineering Society has done is it's created a document which collects together a whole lot of standards from the internet world. So this is IP networking, RTP, the real-time transport protocol, various signaling mechanisms. It's collected those together into an interoperability specification and published that document as a kind of baseline audio transport specification for interoperable audio networking at the transport level. So AES67 is an audio transport only. There are other organisations which are looking in the video world, like SMPTE, for example. One thing to point out though, AES67 is not a specification for a complete system. So it's really focused on the transport pieces of how you get streams of audio running across the network. So it doesn't cover, for example, doesn't mandate a particular service discovery system, and neither does it talk about device control or some of the aspects of building a complete system. On the other hand, I believe that it is a genuinely interesting and useful standard, and mainly for the reasons down the bottom here. It's deployable as a standard, so it doesn't require new Ethernet switches or special kinds of functionality in the network in order to run. It's an IP standard, so it's not a layer 2 standard, it's fully IP standard. So broadly speaking, works a lot like Dante is the rough, general approach to this. I think it's also wise that it does actually focus just on the transport layer, so it's pragmatic in scope. And it doesn't try and be a standard that covers absolutely everything. So in that sense, it's actually both deployable and manufacturers can imagine implementing it. So you can see there are a number of people out there who've announced support for AES67 going forward. So what about AVB? Where are things at with AVB? Audinate, if you've been following what we've been doing in the standards world for a while, you'll know that we've had various demonstrations of AVB stuff with Yamaha equipment and Shure equipment and various things. We have done AVB implementations internally. Where we are right now, though, is our experience is that customer interest, that means manufacturers, for us, interest is declining. And I think there's probably a few reasons for that. One sort of overall reason is it's taken a very long time for AVB to finally kind of get out there. And that, I think, largely is due to issues around requiring special or new functionality in Ethernet switches. So right now, AVB features are not widely available in Ethernet switches. And that's okay if you ship your own switches as part of your system, but if you have to deploy into a network that has existing Ethernet switches, or you want to buy off-the-shelf stuff from Cisco, then this is a problem from a deployment point of view. I think also at a high level, although I'm a geek, an engineer, I'm interested in the details about how these particular standards work. I think a lot of end users and customers actually don't care that much about the details, and what they really want is a standard, and they're not that interested in which one it happens to be. So I think what's going on is that AES67 in the last couple of years has really started to provide a measure of competition in the standards world. And so the AVB adoption of the AVB standard is now seeing competition with something like AES67, which is a more deployable and pragmatic standard with a narrower scope. So what's going to happen with AVB? Well, AVNW activities are going to continue. It's a large organisation. AVB has traction, particularly in the automotive world. There's increasing interest in industrial control. There are even new standards efforts around making AVB work with IP networking and layer 3 stuff in the IETF. So I expect that will continue to go on, and AVNW will continue to exist and produce specifications. But I think the AVB technology will get refined to be more automotive specific or industrial control specific, for example, going forward. So what about Dante and AES67? So we've released a firmware update to manufacturers. So Audinate provides hardware, software, firmware to manufacturers who then go and put it in their products. So we announced that at the NAB show in April. And what that firmware does is that it adds the initial support for AES67 as a new feature in existing Dante equipment. So if you've got Dante equipment using the Brooklyn module, then there will be a firmware update available when manufacturers go through their test cycles and the usual sorts of things they do that will enable AES67 support. One key thing to notice here is that the existing audio transport protocol that's in the Dante system today will continue to function. So you'll have two transport options, and the firmware will essentially be bilingual, and it can speak both transport at the same time. Stream setup for AES67 will be inside Dante controller, and we're also using one of the simple discovery schemes specified in the AES67 specification. So that means that third-party devices will be able to use a standards-based discovery protocol in order to discover Dante AES67 streams that are available on the network. So that's all I wanted to say about standards. Now I want to sort of change gears and shift into talking about a new product, which is Dante Via. What I want to do is give you just a flavour of what Dante Via can do, and certainly encourage you to come over and have a look at the software and see a demo. So Dante Via networks, merges or mixes, and routes all of your computer's audio from applications and sound cards and devices, and enables you to stream those over the network as a Dante channel. So as a diagram here, you can see that Dante Via is a software application, runs on PCs and Macs. It can find all of your audio interfaces like USB, Firewire, Thunderbolt, your audio applications, so maybe a recording application or an audio workstation, and it can take all those signals, all those audio channels, and send and receive them on a Dante network. So you can do things like have Dante Via running on a computer with a bunch of audio channels, and then you can go over the network to another Dante Via running on another computer, and then patch audio in and out. So what we can do with this is we can actually create an audio network exclusively between computers. So if you happen to have computers in places like classrooms, for example, or lecture theatres, you can actually use the computer to be part of the Dante audio system if you want to. In addition, because Dante Via is sending things over the network just as normal Dante channels, you can send and receive audio to all of the equipment that's already available from manufacturers out there. So what Dante Via is doing is it's getting all of the audio channels and resources inside the computer and making them available as channels on the network that you can then send and receive across the network. So this has got a whole lot of possibilities, and one of the challenges for us is that we've built this thing, and we're sure that you guys are going to find use cases for it that we haven't thought of. But anyway, what I would like to do is to just go through a few use cases to give you a flavour of what you can do. So first thing is you can create a computer-only Dante audio network. If you're familiar with Dante Virtual Sound Card, you know it needs a hardware device to have a clock. Dante Via doesn't have that restriction. So you can just set up a Dante network with a couple of laptops or PCs that you have installed somewhere. You can connect any legacy USB device or FireWire device that you have already. So for me, this was motivating because I've got some fairly expensive FireWire audio interfaces that I would quite like to use with my Dante network and not have to rebuy them. But there are also lots of quite cost-effective and good quality things like USB microphones, which you can use in a Dante network with something like Dante Via. So it allows you to extend computer microphones and speakers across networks, and it allows you also to route audio applications, specific audio applications, just the audio from those somewhere through the network as well. Rock on. So here's an example. And so here we have a very simple point-to-point Dante Via system. So we've got a regular microphone, a USB interface, copy of Dante Via, and then there's a network in between to the other Dante Via. That might be just a straight-through blue cable, or it might be connected to a switch. And then we've got an analog output to a set of speakers. So what I'm going to do is just show a short video of how you would set that up with Dante Via to give you a flavour of how the user interface would work. So here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is plug in the USB device. So it'll appear. Then we're going to enable Dante, which puts the channels from the USB device onto the network. Now we're going to flip over to the other device, which can now see those channels on the Dante network, and drag and drop to the built-in output, and that creates the audio connection across the network. So this is a very different user interface from Dante Controller. It's very drag and drop, and it's very kind of computer-oriented. But that's the kind of thing that you do in order to set up a Dante Via network. So if I want to just network one specific application, what happens with Dante Via is it treats applications appear in Dante Via much like sound cards. So applications have channels going in and channels going out, and you can route the audio from those applications individually. So here we're going to take iTunes, and we're going to take just the audio from iTunes and then patch it across a network to a loudspeaker. And when you see this, you'll notice that we use Dante Controller for doing some of this patching. So part of the setup is done in Dante Via, part of it is done in Dante Controller. So all these channels that Dante Via has are actually just ordinary Dante channels traveling across the network. So what this looks like is, there's iTunes. We enable iTunes for transmission on the network, which creates the channels. And then we flip open Dante Controller, which is a little bit hard to see, but if we zoom in, you can see that iTunes left and iTunes right are channels. And then we can route the audio from just iTunes to the amplifier that's on the network. Okay. Slightly more complicated example. In this instance, I've got the iTunes and I've got a USB microphone. So I want to mix those two guys together with no system sounds, no beeps, no emails arriving, that kind of stuff, and then send those across the network. So how do I do that? Down in the bottom right, there's a virtual sound card mixing thing. So that's the USB microphone being dragged to the sound card. And then we grab iTunes, drag that to the sound card, and we add it, which creates a mix. Then that mix has two things in it. Then we enable it on the network, which creates the audio channels, the mix of the two. And then we can jump across into Dante controller, and you can see there's a 2-channel virtual sound card which has the mix of just that microphone and the iTunes. And then I can patch that into an amplifier. Okay? And the final example is just monitoring a random channel. So this is a very common thing to want to do. You've got a whole bunch of channels out there in the Dante network, and you want to go, what's the audio that's in them? How can I hear it? Dante Via lets you do that. So the steps in this are actually to enable your analog output, like your headphone output, as a channel on the Dante network, and then route stuff into it. So what that looks like is my built-in output. I enable Dante, which creates the channels on the network and makes it available. And then again, I can jump across into Dante controller. My computer is called Memento, and it's got the built-in output. And then I can just patch random channels to that output and listen to them one by one. Okay. So they're the 4 use cases that I wanted to give you a quick introduction. So that paints a picture, I hope, of what Dante Via can do and the kind of things, the applications that it's useful for. So basically, it's a way of connecting all the kind of audio stuff that you have inside your computer to a Dante network in a very flexible way with some mixing and routing. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Would there be anything stopping you from using a VPN connection remotely to do some of that Dante monitoring? Like, say, if a customer called in with a service question, instead of having a bullet truck to get out there and be on the actual physical LAN?
Yeah. In principle, no. In practice right now, it would need to be a layer 2 VPN, and there would need to be some pretty good performance, like you'd need to have guaranteed latency and stuff like that across the network for it to function well. One of the things we're actually about to talk about literally in the next couple of slides is support for things like routing, IP routing, which is a natural kind of thing to try and do with VPNs, so more at the IP layer. So I think in principle you could get it to work now by extending the layer 2 network through a VPN, but I think the real long-term solution is IP routing kind of behavior. But in principle, yeah, and that's where we want to get to. Yeah, for sure. So that's all I wanted to talk about with respect to Dante Via. Certainly you're welcome to come and have a look and play around with it. The last thing I wanted to do is paint a little bit of a picture about where we see the kind of next sets of development going for Dante systems in general. And this is really around what kinds of network services are needed to really build large, maintainable and scalable audio network systems. So one of the things that's sometimes said about networking is that the only real problem that's worth solving is scaling. So once you start designing network systems, they very often fail to scale very well. And so I think scale is one of those things that we think about at Audinate, and as Dante becomes more successful, it's going to be the kind of the thing that we really need to address in order to enable larger Dante systems going forward. So today, most audio networks are not really that large, at least not by networking standards at least. Perhaps there are some exceptions to this. There's certainly the Sydney Trains network, which has got, many, many thousands of Dante nodes on railway stations around the place, but that's divided up into a lot of pieces. So by and large, audio networks are not huge. They're not large. As audio networking becomes ubiquitous and people build larger systems and then add stuff to existing systems, then integration like never before is possible. So you're able to remotely get into, via a VPN, for example, get into a system or build a much larger system and treat it as one managed giant network thing. So systems will become larger, they'll become much more integrated. And one of the critical things to do, at least for Audinate, I think, is to develop tools and services that support large-scale systems. Certainly, this is something that we're working on right now. So what kind of needs are we talking about or thinking about at the moment? And certainly in the sort of near to medium term, I think there are four. And these are the four that I've selected here. One is to be able to combine LANs into larger systems, and this is the IP routing piece. So this is the ability to do synchronization, discovery, transport across IP routers. That's a fundamental way that networks scale today, is by using IP routing. A second very important thing to be able to do is to allow systems to share the same network infrastructure without interfering with each other. So that means being able to put in a system for, say, the lecture theatres in a university, and then also have an evacuation system sharing the same network infrastructure. And if someone screws up the lecture theatres, the evacuation system doesn't go down. So that kind of isolation property. Also, it's very important to have administrative controls that prevent unauthorised changes. So this is certainly a big issue right now with Dante networks, and something that we're working quite hard on internally. Right now there are not a lot of, we rely on network-based controls in order to protect Dante systems, but we know that going forward we're going to need more in the way of administrative controls that allow people who are putting in systems to be confident that they won't be changed, either accidentally or maliciously. And finally, logging and tracing. So when you have a network of some kind that's even small, things go wrong, stuff gets unplugged, and you want to know what happened and why. So particularly if you're responsible for maintaining it. So having the ability to take the kind of stuff that Dante Controller logs and the information that Dante Controller gives you and be able to store that somewhere so you can come back and do a post-mortem on it later is the kind of thing that we're looking at here. So what we have in development at the moment internally is we're working on a services platform which will enable us to deliver those kinds of things into Dante systems going forward. And the two places we're starting, the two kind of services we want to both prototype and get out the door, are services for routed IP networks to allow scaling, and administrative controls. So the ability to lock people out of devices and provide access control. So these are the two initial services, and over time we imagine offering more services to enable the scaling of Dante networks like these two kinds of services. So to wrap up, that's all I have for today. So we talked, did a bit of a State of the Union about where things are at with respect to standards and AES67. So Dante has support for AES67 now. It's in the hands of manufacturers. It may take some time for manufacturers to do their testing and QA and everything else, but that's underway. I also talked about Dante Via and tried to give you a bit of a flavour for what Dante Via can do. And then the last thing was looking ahead to the kinds of services that will be needed in order to scale Dante networks going forward. And in particular, we're focused on routing and security as the two initial services that we believe we need to deliver to make that happen. Any questions? Yeah.
Will AES67 run on an AVNW switch?
Yeah, it should. It should. So the question was, will AES67 run on an AVB network switch? Yes.
But not vice versa.
Sorry?
But AVB will run on a standard network, correct?
Yeah, so AVB relies on new functionality inside the Ethernet switches, and if that new functionality is not there, then it won't work. Yeah. Yeah.
Another question here.
Yeah.
So relative to your discussion on routing and the possibility of having, say, a press or an AMX send command strings for dynamic routing.
Yep.
I can see that being valuable where there are so many different manufacturers.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
Is there any thought to that?
Yep. So this is one of these areas where, yes, I think it would be valuable. Yes, there have been thoughts. So at the moment, Crestron is a Dante licensee. So they have our APIs, and they have the ability to actually control Dante routing, including do all the kinds of things that Dante Controller does. And that's true of AMX as well, because Harman is also a licensee. So if the question is, should someone do it, then the answer would be yes. And then the follow-on question is, who? Yeah.
Is something that Automate would have as
Right.
to Dante Controller, as opposed to having a third party?
Right, yes. So, yes, I agree. Haven't quite worked out how precisely we would deliver that at the moment, in that I think there is value in having an API or strings, control strings like you say, in order to be able to control routing, particularly, and indeed other information. Yeah.
It's not on the horizon at the moment.
I would say it's not on the roadmap for the next 12 months kind of thing, but it's certainly something I actively think about. Yeah. Yeah.
Dante Via, is it a replacement for the virtual sound card?
Ah.
Or they should work together?
Currently, the Dante Virtual Sound Card and Dante Via don't work together on the same computer at the same time. Their Dante Via is very much focused on audio applications and sound card bridging, those sorts of functionalities. It does have a virtual sound card inside it, but it doesn't have all of the features that Dante Virtual Sound Card has in terms of sample rates and pull-ups and pull-downs and all those kinds of things. So it's kind of a different thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Support for Linux for Dante Via, is that on any roadmap?
Yeah. So that is not currently on a product roadmap, but I'd be very interested to talk to you about what you wanted to do with it. Raspberry Pi. Okay, fine. I may or may not have one of them. Can I confirm nor deny? Yeah. Yeah.
Do you ever foresee being able to use Dante in a WAN application?
Yeah, absolutely. When you say WAN, do you mean across the internet?
I want to put an application in this city and then distribute it to Los Angeles.
Yep. We have manufacturers doing that today in the broadcast world. For
What?
like Bosch, the RTS stuff for doing comms between broadcast centers. Yeah, so it's certainly, if we're talking about a wide area network that is kind of, fiber links or, managed network between across the country, then
Public IP address is point A to point B. I'm able to point from this router to that router over there.
yeah. So the critical thing is a Dante's, huh?
Go through the internet.
Right, it's through the public internet. So right now, we are not doing that. Yeah. So if you've got a private connection, like a fiber between parts or a network that's built across, then yes. Yeah.
Well, that has the same network. I mean, it's on paper because it's physically connected.
Yeah.
Public IP, point A to point B through the internet. I'm trying to distribute audio from a central location to multiple locations for
Yeah.
hotel groups.
For hotel groups? Yeah.
They're able to distribute
Yeah.
conferences.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
they're looking to distribute audio, not video, just the audio part.
Yeah.
They'll do the video through Skype or whatever.
Yep, okay. So in my mind, the way I think about this is for uncompressed audio of the normal kind of Dante variety, then the network needs a kind of delay guarantee, so the packets need to turn up in time. So when one goes across the public internet, say through a cable modem at home or a DSL connection or something like that, generally there's a massive amount of latency variation, right? So I couldn't hand on heart say, yeah, you could do that. But on the other hand, I can say that we have customers doing the I've got a network that I know the performance of, and they're doing the audio across quite long distances today.
Okay, latency's not an issue with the client. We're just gonna stream music,
Yeah,
not a problem.
shouldn't be.
Who do I talk to about designing that?
Designing that for conferencing stuff. How about we have a conversation later? We'll talk a little bit more and work it out. Yeah. Yeah.
Just a quick question about how the clock works on Dante.
Yep.
What level of I mean, that is all encapsulated in TCP/IP?
Correct. So everything that we do in a Dante system is an IP packet, and largely it's all UDP/IP. So the audio is UDP/IP, and so is the clock. One of the benefits that gives you is that you can use the standard quality of service information that's in the IP packets, and you can put priority numbers in the IP packets, and then the Ethernet switches go, wow, that's a clock packet, that's like super important, straight to the head of the queue. Yeah. So we do that kind of stuff.
So are you tagging that for QoS?
Correct. So we do diff-serve marking of IP packets in order to separate the clock synchronization from the audio from everything else. Yeah. Yeah.
Just got a question about the channel count limits of Dante as a whole.
Yep.
Is it restricted by the network? Is it just restricted by your current high-capacity card?
Yep. There's a few ways of answering that. The one way of answering it is to say that from an architecture point of view, the way Dante works, there are no magic numbers that would prevent the channel count from scaling to really crazy numbers. Another way of answering it is to say that particular implementations do have a certain maximum channel count. So at the moment we've got 512 by 512 single implementations in one FPGA kind of idea. And another way of answering it is if I say I have 512 channels on that ClearCom box and some other Clear 1 box and then some other Clear 1 box, and I just keep adding those boxes to a network. The network itself can have any number. So it scales with the amount of data, bit rate, so sample rate used, choose more data up, the size of the pipes in the network. So there are no fundamental limits.
So, assuming we don't want more than 512 on one single device,
Yep.
we should be able to get 1,000, 2,000 channels running
Easily.
on the network?
No problem. Yeah. So something like Sydney Trains, for example, has one of the designs for that had, close to 10,000 nodes of audio, and they're like 4-channel kind of nodes, no problem. Well, it's a big system, and there are things to worry about, but it's not like the networking technology is going to stop working at some uncomfortable point. Yep. By the way, that goes back to the scaling thing. It's about designing the architecture of the system and the services to enable it to really scale, so that there are no fundamental knees or bad breakpoints in it.
Where do we point IT personnel? I work on a university campus, and
Yeah.
they're difficult to get to look into what they would need to allow the network to talk campus-wide as opposed to just within a building.
Yeah. So, is the issue the need to be able to route, or is the issue to just a comfort level about?
I think it's a little of both, but the routing, I mean, I'm not a network person, so
Right.
it seems as though, for example, if we want to stream life size, we have to get them to approve that sort of flow in their managed switches. Otherwise, they look at it as some sort of an attack on their system, and their software throttles down. So
Right. Yeah. Okay. Life size may be one of those things that does have a hell of a lot of data going with it. So I think one of the benefits about audio channels is that even with uncompressed audio channels, it's not that much. So it's like 1.5 megabits per second per audio channel at 48K, 24-bit kind of thing. So you're talking 5 megabits for a 4-channel Dante flow traveling through. So it probably isn't the same kind of quantum as, say, live size. But different campuses have different policies. My experience of dealing with IT people is once they figure out that what we've done with Dante is to make the AV networking thing look like an IT networking thing, they go, cool, I can do that because you did the diffserv thing, so I can work out which bits are the audio and which bits are the real time and which bits are the high rate. My experience has been that it's about giving them some basic information about what the system is doing, and then that taps into all of their experience with voice over IP systems and everything else, and they can just deploy their management tools that they have.
Sure. So is there a place on your particular site or your company where we could point them so that they,
I have seen various documents that we have around talking to IT people. Kieran, you might know.